Culture seminar series. The spring lineup should be online soon, so you should be able to see that. We've got a bunch of great speakers coming, and that the first talk is at the regularly scheduled time on Monday. I think it's, gosh, now I don't remember the date, but the first Monday of spring quarter. So 28th, thank you. So today we have the pleasure of having an extra speaker on Wednesday, so I'm glad you all could make it. It's Mike McCullough from the Department of Psychology at the University of Miami, and he's going to be talking about evolved cognitive mechanisms for revenge and forgiveness. So welcome.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon. Thanks for taking some time out of your week to spend it with me. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the work that we've been doing and the thinking we've been doing in my lab for the past several years to try to understand a little bit about the kinds of hardware humans might be outfitted with to help them solve a very interesting kind of problem that all organisms face, which is the problem of exploitation. So what I want to do today is really situate this basic set of mechanisms within the larger problem of exploitation among animals, and then talk a little bit about what I think a well-designed system or systems needs to be able to do computationally to try to deal with some of this. And I want to nominate revenge as one type of mechanism that natural selection might create to deter or discourage exploitation. I also want to talk about sort of my major day job, which is actually about forgiveness, and try to put that in the same framework of talking about how we think about mechanisms designed to deal with the problem of exploitation. Because I think forgiveness is in fact a secondary kind of problem you have to solve if you're going to have a revenge mechanism designed to deter exploitation. And so I want to tell you a little bit about how we've been thinking about that. And then finally, talk about some work we've been doing to understand some of the neuroendocrine supports for revenge and forgiveness that also come out of this way of thinking about these phenomena. I have to say it's a real honor to be with you today. This is a really great department, and some of you have been really influential in my reading over the past many years, so it's a real privilege for me to be able to share some of this with you. I look forward to your questions. Exploitation is a fact of life for organisms, and when I talk about exploitation, really what I want to mean is a social relationship in which one individual extracts a benefit for itself at cost to another individual. So we have cowbirds, right? Cowbirds are these brood parasites that are all too happy to deposit their eggs into the nests of other birds, who then take on those eggs and sit on them for 32 days and keep them warm until they hatch. Classic kind of parasitic arrangement. We know that from the work of David Haig and other people that really there is substantial conflict between fetuses and mothers, and that fetuses come with adaptations designed to pull resources away from mothers, blood and energy in particular, which can generate tremendous costs on mothers that lead to gestational diabetes and gestational high blood pressure. But this one way of thinking about this is as a suite of mechanisms designed for that fetus to exploit the machinery of its mother. In '71, when Trivers wrote about reciprocal altruism, he talked about the mutualisms between large reef fish that are covered in ectoparasites and the little cleaner fish, like this blue wrasse here, that often come along to clean them. One of the interesting things about this system that we know now is that those little wrasses, while they will eat parasites off of these large cleaner fish, they actually don't prefer the parasites. They prefer to eat the fish itself, the client itself. In fact, more specifically, they prefer the mucus that the fish, the client fish develops as sort of a protection. So they're eating off preference when they eat parasites. What they'd really like to be doing is eating mucus, and really, who wouldn't? So this is a system in which there is a strong temptation for these wrasses to exploit their clients. And we now know that they do, and that this is a system that has the strong potential for exploitation to occur. So exploitation is a problem for all animals, and the work of Chris Bohm suggests that exploitation has been a problem for people for a long time. In the 10 societies he's studied so intensively that he calls Pleistocene appropriate societies, he cites really high levels of occurrence of a lot of behaviors that we, I think, would recognize as forms of exploitation here. Acquiring a benefit for yourself at a fitness cost to another individual. Because exploitation has been a problem and is a problem for energy capturing creatures, it acts as a selection pressure that gives rise to anti-exploitation mechanisms, devices, solutions. For example, we know that we can think of sickle cell anemia as the unfortunate outcome of a single gene adaptation to that little parasite that mosquitoes inject into people to give them malaria. So if you are heterozygous for this little mutation, you get increased resistance to malaria. That's a very simple, kind of dumb, obvious example of an anti-exploitation mechanism that works by increasing host resistance. But there are other really interesting ones, I think more interesting ones. Stotting in gazelles. I don't know that anyone talks about it this way, but this is an attempt behaviorally for a prey species to signal to a potential predator the likely fruitlessness of trying to eat it, to chase it and eat it, by demonstrating its health and its vigor and its good body condition, by jumping high up in the air. It's attempting to change the potential, lion's computations of the likelihood of getting a good payoff by exploiting the soma of this, I guess that's a gazelle, some four-legged critter. What is it? Thompson's gazelle, thank you. This moth up here on the right has developed a kind of coloration to look like a moth, or to look like an owl or something like that. I don't know what it is. But its effect is psychological. It's designed to change computations in a potential predator's head, up in its neural meat somewhere, to say, eating you is not going to provide the benefits to me that I might otherwise have thought. Poison dart frogs are another example, of course, right? They are signaling the unprofitability of trying to capture energy from their bodies to potential predators. Even this little bug here that's developed sort of a thorn is doing something very interesting as an anti-exploitation device. It is mimicking a thorn. It is mimicking another species anti-exploitation device, right? So we've got this, it's sitting on this plant, something that has thorns, designed to deter other individuals from eating it or from getting too close to it and knocking off its fruit. And this insect has developed a thorn-like kind of structure on its body. I don't know if it actually is an anti-exploitation device or not. If you ate that thing, would it hurt? Would the thorny-looking thing on the top hurt you? I don't know. But it's certainly designed to make you recompute the fruitfulness of eating it. So we've got behavioral and non-behavioral adaptations designed to cause potential exploiters to recompute the profitability of exploiting you. And even in the reef fish now, we know that one of the ways that these large client fish deter exploitation is through punishment. They will actually either chase away cleaner fish, or they will attack them, or they will find other other cleaner fish that are less willing to eat their mucus. So they will withdraw benefits from these little blue wrasses in order to reduce exploitation. What I want to do is situate humans' propensities for revenge among these kind of anti-exploitation devices. There's evidence also from Chris Bohm's work that humans have kind of a suite of very common sorts of punishments that they impose among conspecifics when they've experienced some of these exploitive behaviors. These are very common ones. Some of them obviously are around 100% or more that he sees in these 10 Pleistocene appropriate societies and in their ethnographic records. So if revenge is an anti-exploitation device, what I want to suggest that it should be good at doing is levying a cost on individuals who have imposed a cost on the self, which is designed to change their computations in the future about the profitability of harming you again, right? So you harm me in order to extract a benefit from me at a cost to myself. With revenge, what I want to say it's doing is it's acting just like toxins in a poison dart frog. It's an attempt to change the computations of the profitability of harming me a second time. That's maintained through the poison dart frog's toxins are maintained at a level of at an ultimate level, right? This is a system where the learning has taken place in deep time instead of through individual interactions with individual frogs, because once you've eaten me, I can't very well change your incentives toward me in the future. So this is something that has evolved in deep time, but we think of revenge as a mechanism designed to facilitate learning toward me as an individual about my likelihood of extracting a cost from me in the future should you harm me again, as a way of causing you to recompute the net gains you'll get by exploiting me, okay? This is a very different story about punishment among human beings than one of the major stories going on in the social sciences right now, which is a story about altruistic punishment. And I want to raise this story because it leads to some very different predictions about behavior that we'll see in the laboratory that I want to talk about. So everyone knows, I think probably at this point, unless you've been hiding under a really big rock, the story about altruistic punishment in humans, which is that humans have some sort of instinct to step into the fights between other individuals and impose a cost on an exploiter for the benefit of third parties who might interact with this exploitive individual in the future. So the story that Fair and Gachter want to tell in this work, a paper that's Google Scholar tells me has now been cited 1,400 times since 2002, is that humans are outfitted with an instinct to step into other individuals' fights and impose costs on bad guys as a way of causing those bad guys to recompute the gains that they're going to get from exploiting other individuals in their groups in the future. All right? So there's a very clear prediction there that people will step into other individuals' fights and impose retaliatory costs as a way of facilitating this updating of the gains of exploitation. This is a really different kind of story than we want to tell about punishment, which is that it's not an adaptation for altruism, but it's an adaptation for deterrence. And this is not, I have to say, this is not my story, okay? This is a story that Daley and Wilson very clearly laid out in '88 in Homicide. It's a story that Robert Frank talked about regarding revenge in Passions Within Reason. Pinker picked this up in The Blank Slate. And we talked about it I talked about it in Beyond Revenge in my book in 2008, which you can buy multiple copies of still in hardback if you'd like. So let me tell you about an experiment that we just finished up in my lab over the ink's barely dry on this experiment. And we were trying to really look at this notion of altruistic punishment in what we think is a good, tight design that will allow us to even see, first off, if there is a mechanism in the head that prompts third parties, bystanders, to get involved in other people's exploitation dilemmas in order to impose costs on exploiters to update their estimates of the benefits of exploitation. So this is a study, an experiment we did with 200 and something, you do the math, 209 people who came into our laboratory thinking they were going to participate in two different economic games. All right. The first game, there were 42 people in each of these cells or so. You came into the experiment thinking there were two other players you were going to play with and that you would be randomly assigned to one of three conditions. Okay. The first condition was a decision maker. All right. The decision maker is going to have the opportunity to change one person's outcome. All right. So that's one role you might play. The second is as a receiver. Right. You're just the passive recipient of the decision maker's choices. And then there's an observer, and the observer just stands by. So you're going to be, you think, as a naive subject, randomly assigned to one of these conditions. In actual fact, we randomly assign you to only one of 5 conditions initially. The decision maker is always somebody else. You're either going to be a receiver of that decision maker's behavior, or just a third party standing by watching interactions unfold, okay? And so we actually have 5 different conditions, which I'll quickly try to lay out for you quickly. Each player comes in and is given $5, right? So you as the subject are told, hey, here's $5 for you to, it's mad money for you to do something with during this game or just hang on to. Then we for our 5th condition, we have $9 that we give subjects, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Then we randomly assign people to one of 5 conditions. You're either going to receive fair treatment from the decision maker, which is that the person's going to sort of leave your $5 alone, or you're going to receive unfairness. That decision maker is going to remove 4 of your $5. You're going to, the third condition is to observe fairness. You're just going to stand by and watch the decision maker not do anything to the recipient's $5, leave that person's $5 alone, or you're going to stand on the sidelines and watch the decision maker take $4 away from the third party. And then in the 5th condition, you've got $9 just from the outset, and you're going to watch the decision maker take $4 away from the third party. So those are our 5 conditions. You're standing around either experiencing fairness or unfairness, or watching fairness or unfairness occur between the 2 other individuals. We take some fairness and morality questions to see what people's perceptions are of this situation after they watch the interaction unfold. We ask some emotion questions to find out what they're feeling. And then we have them participate in a second game. In this second game, you are told it's a new game, completely new game. In this game, you just so happen to have been assigned to the role of decision maker. And you have the opportunity to take money away from a partner or give money to a partner. And then there's no one else watching. There's no observer in this condition. So all this interaction is taking place by computer, okay? So you can either give money to your partner, who just happens to have been the decision maker from the previous round, all right? Or you can take money away from them. If you take money away from that, it just disappears, right? It just disappears into the ether. And to do that, you pay $1 for every $4 you want to take away from the observer. So if you want to remove $1 from their outcome, you can pay $0.25 to do that, right? Or you can do nothing. You can just let interaction unfold and not change the recipient's outcome at all. Okay? So what we want to know is, across these 5 conditions, how much money do our subjects take away from their partner in game 2? Their partner in game 2 was the decision maker in game 1, who either treated someone fairly or unfairly. We want to look at their moral judgments about this situation from the first game, and then we want to look at their self-reported anger. All right? So first of all, I want to look at the percentage of people, subjects in our 5 conditions from round 1, who punished in round 2, okay? So we've got our 5 conditions. You were either the recipient of fairness, the recipient of unfairness, right? Someone took $4 from you. You observed fairness, right? You observed somebody else sort of treat someone else indifferently. I mean, if you don't want to call that fairness, you can call it indifference. or you observed unfairness, right? Somebody reached in and took $4 away from someone else, or you were sitting there with $9 to watch a decision maker remove $4 from another person. We add this in so we can look at look at the additional impact of envy in this condition, right? Because these are people whose outcomes are actually lower. You're holding on $5, but you're watching someone else end up with $9. So we can look, we thought this would be a nice metric of how much envy is at play here. All right? So what you see first of all is we get 41% of our recipients of unfairness punishing, right? Offering to pay some amount of money in this 1 to 4 punishment technology to remove money from the recipient in game 2, who was the decision maker in game 1, all right? So 41% of people will pay a cost, right, to punish someone else from round 1 who treated them badly. The observers of unfairness, about 24% punish. The observers of unfairness who were sitting there with $9, we get about 14% of them who punish. So at first blush, this looks like, well, there's some punishment going on among the observers of unfairness, okay? Here's the thing for me that's really interesting about this, though. If we move forward and look at the amounts of punishment that are being imposed, all right? The thing you want to do if punishment is recalibrational is you want to remove enough money from a bad guy's pot that he has to realize that his unfair behavior in round 1 literally did not pay. It did not produce a positive gain, right? So you need to pay at least $1 in order to remove $4 from that guy to make his, sort of the profitability of that initial exploitive act balance out to 0, right? Does that make sense?
So the guy who's being punished was the person who treated the punisher unfairly, or somebody drawn from the pool of...
These are the same 3 people, all right? So the same 3 people in game 1 also played in game 2.
And they know it.
They know, right, they know that. Yeah, that's exactly right. So what we get, first of all, is we're getting much higher amounts of investment in punishment among the recipients of unfairness, right? They're paying, on average, $1.31 to punish. That's across all 42 of our subjects. Whereas we're only getting an average of 9 cents being paid to punish among the observers of unfairness. So they're willing to pay less than a dime on average for the pleasure, the delight they're getting from altruistic punishment. But I think the story is actually a little richer than that. Because again, for punishment to be recalibrational in this sense, for it literally to convince that bad guy from round 1 that crime did not pay, you have to remove enough of his earnings to make the net gain from his exploitive behavior in round 1 zero out. We get 12 of 42 participants paying enough money, at least $1, so they can remove $4 from the pot of that decision maker in game 1. We only have 2 people who are willing to do that in game 1. We also had, by the way, in this condition, we had 1 person willing to give the guy $5, right? So I would argue that you don't even need to do stats on this, okay? And if we have 2 people out of 40 giving only paying enough money to get $4 of punishment, whereas we've got 12 here doing it. I mean, you don't even need to run stats on that to see that there's a phenomenon here that's happening for the experiencers of exploitation that's just not happening for the observers of punishment. So again, this is what we think is going on, is that this use of your $1, right? It's $1 you really are going to take home with you, is designed to change the perceived profitability of exploitive behavior. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
So the third parties know that the second party, the victim of the violation, does have the opportunity to punish themselves.
The victim of the violation from round 1, they don't know that. So we tried to remove the possibility of reputational gains in round 2. We told these 2 people in the second game that third person is gone. They can't see what you're doing. It's just the 2 of you guys. Is that the question you were getting at?
Not really. I was wondering whether the third party knows that the second party had an opportunity to take revenge or punish.
Does the bad guy from round 1 know that?
No. Does the guy
the victim from round one.
There's the observer from round one.
Observer.
Oh, does he know that you might get a chance later on to pound this person?
No, I mean,
Everyone knows. I'm the only one who's not
the
understanding.
question is, I mean, you may expect third-party punishment in situations in which second parties do not have the opportunity to initiate punishment on their own.
Mhm.
I'm wondering in your experiment whether it was clear to the third parties that the second party could initiate punishment on their own and may have done so.
No, as far as they know, there was no mechanism for the second parties to do any punishment at all. Right? It was never. These games were completely unlinked. In fact, we don't talk about these as punishment games. We don't ask people how much they want to punish. We don't ask how much you want to change somebody's incentives. They are viewed as hermetically sealed vessels that have no relationship to each other. So we don't. This is not presented as, hey, would you like to adjust somebody's outcomes? It's just a game where you can give someone money or take some money away from somebody, and in round two you can give someone money or take money away from somebody. Questions? Yes, sir.
Well, mine's just, I mean, following up with her, do they assume that the other players that are in the game are also going to play a second round like they did? Because right, they're assuming there are multiple players that are coming into the lab, right?
They're told that you're going to play games. Sometimes there will be 3 of you involved. Sometimes there will only be 2 people involved.
Right.
We don't tell them how many games there are going to be. So they don't know from one round to the next what's coming up.
Because they might, I think just really what Sarah's saying is that they might assume that other players are going to experience the second round like they did, and that the other players will handle it themselves.
Right.
So they don't have to.
That would even, I think, be more wounding to an argument about altruistic punishment.
No, that's ridiculous. This whole thing is just, there's nothing about altruistic punishment that says that individuals don't interact strategically. It's just, I mean, it's so far from what somebody like Ernst would say. It's just ridiculous. I mean,
What's ridiculous?
Nothing about altruistic punishment that says that people don't engage in deterrence. Zero. And they're not alternatives. And
Yeah, but what's ridiculous?
what's ridiculous is to use deterrence as evidence for there being no altruistic punishment.
I'm pointing to the lack of altruistic punishment as evidence for the lack of altruistic
Well,
punishment.
that's not what you just said 2 seconds ago, I should have been, I'll wait until the end to make this point.
Okay, yeah.
So, the way you formulated it was, you were trying to see whether altruistic punishment was in the subject's heads.
Right.
What that leaves out, what seems that the design leaves out is the possibility that altruistic punishment could be in the culture. That people will do altruistic punishment when they're being observed to do it, because they think it's a good thing to do.
Sure, but I mean, where is it? I mean, it's not shown.
But this game, since they're not being observed, either punishing or not punishing,
Right.
then there's no opportunity for them to show what a good person they are by punishing somebody.
Right. That's fine. That's fine. That would be a kind of fitness payoff that FAIR would be. They want there to be something in addition to behavior that might be incentivized by reputational payoffs. Is that not true?
No, I'm just.
Oh.
We want to move on with the talk.
Okay. Moral judgments are identical, depending on, irrespective of whether you are an observer of unfairness or an experiencer of it. So we have here 2 questions. Was the decision maker's behavior morally wrong from round 1? And we're asking the recipients of unfairness and the experiencers, the witnesses of it. These means do not differ, right? So this is not a problem of perceptual inattention, right? Also, the second question, was the decision maker's behavior fair, right? It's viewed as equally unfair, irrespective of whether you are a decision maker, an experiencer of that unfairness or just an observer of that unfairness. What does differ is anger. Okay, we get a lot more anger for people who've actually experienced the unfairness than we do among the observers of that unfairness. And again, the unfairness that we're seeing is not that we're seeing as third parties is not generating enough punishment behavior to offset the benefits of the punishment, of the bad behavior. Okay. So that's the story we want to tell, is that in this case, there are not a lot of people jumping in to do the third party thing in an altruistic way. But what you are getting is behavior that does look like it is well suited to deterring exploitation in the first party case. Okay? Now, that's the claim we want to make about what revenge or punishment is for. I mean, I really think you have to follow the fitness benefits for these kind of behaviors. So for us, the benefit that's going to come from punishment has got to be behavior that it's got to be a payoff that you can trace back to ego's fitness. And that's what generates mechanisms for things like punishment. All right. There is a problem with punishment, though, as an adaptation. And the problem with it is that a lot of relationships can maintain residual value even though exploitation has occurred, right? So if you are one of these nice little cleaner fish and you've come and tried to eat my mucus, that doesn't change the fact that I still need somebody to eat my parasites, right? So if I were to eat all of the reef fish or chase them away or this sort of thing, then this leaves me without individuals to eat my parasites. So, and I think this is true of many social relationships among conspecifics as well. Just because you've harmed me doesn't mean our relationship has lost all of its residual value. So how do you have a way of deterring exploitation, but also being able to recapture access to benefits that are going to be socially mediated in the future by that same individual who's exploited you? I think this is a really serious problem for evolutionary-minded psychologists who think about social relationships to think through. You know, how do you recapture benefits? Because these are, you know, these social relationships in which we live are not, we cannot tag them always as unambiguously fitness negative or unambiguously fitness positive. And it does look like, from a lot of animal literature, that this is a very common problem, right? An individual who's just about to exploit you, to remove a benefit from you, obtain a benefit for itself at a cost to you, still is left with the problem of having to live with you after this exploitation is taking place. And we can see in lots of species the evolution of behaviors, friendly, affiliative, post-conflict behaviors that seem to have the effect in the end of paving the way for the restoration of constructive interactions, right? You see them in domestic dogs and wolves and all kinds of primates. Evidently, even in bottlenose dolphins, there is this friendly post-affiliation contact that's been called reconciliation. And I'm even told there's some people that think humans do this. So the problem that we think these behaviors is designed to address is this problem of maintaining valuable relationships despite conflicts of interest. What we now know about reconciliation is that it is not, among non-human animals, it's not sort of randomly dispensed among all of your potential interaction partners. It really seems to be something that happens among valuable relationship partners. Genetic relatives, allies, coalitional allies, and even, yes, even friends. So it seems to be preserved for relationships where we can, again, trace the fitness payoffs to the individuals engaging in the reconciliation. So that's the payoff that seems to be getting captured. But even with these kind of relationships, there's still some risk of exploitation by the individual in the future. So this is the key computational problem, I think, that a system like this has to solve. How do you figure out which relationships to restore in a friendly, affiliative way in light of the fact that the risk of future exploitation is probably never zero, right? Like how do you manage those quantities to come up with decisions that would have returned fitness payouts as the system was evolving, all right? So that's really how, in just this very simple-minded way, we want to think about the process of forgiveness. That there's some integrating function that wants to measure, get indices from the environment of the perceived relationship value associated with continued interaction with this individual. Might be kinship, might be reciprocal altruism. If you're human, it might be coalitional support. It can come in lots of different currencies, but at some level, that relationship value information gets distilled down to some sort of bolus of information. And that has to be weighed against the perceived risk of future exploitation, get integrated in some magical way, and lead to this thing called forgiveness, which is a forbearing of revenge in order to engage in constructive behaviors that will pave the way for a relationship in which individuals have positive regard for each other. All right. Let me tell you a little bit about some of the work we've been trying to do to look at these two quantities and their effects on behavior. This is a study we did, it was a longitudinal study on forgiveness, in which we had 120 people who had just been harmed in the past couple of days by someone in their real lives. So these were roommates, these were friends, these were bosses, these were people they saw socially, who harmed them in some way they really thought was unpleasant and wrong. And then we allow time to pass. And what we want to do is measure rates of change in their the trajectories of their feelings of vengefulness and desire to avoid the person who harmed them over a 100-day period. Okay. So what we're going to do is get daily records for 21 days of how they're feeling toward the person who harmed them, and then 100 days out in the future we're going to measure once again for a follow-up, so we can estimate rates of change and get nice trajectories for people. Prior to starting these consecutive daily records, we measured characteristics of their relationships, their transgressors and the transgressions, and we measure. It's very. I mean, this is not neuroscience here. It's a self-report measure of the value that they ascribe to that relationship even after there had been a harm that had occurred. And what we want to know is, can we predict rates of change in a scale that we call the trim inventory, which is designed to measure how much you still hate somebody who harmed you, essentially. It's these 18 items, positive and negatively scored. As the scale goes down, it means you're getting more forgiving toward the person who harmed you. We measured perceived relationship value with a simple-minded scale like this. I think you might concur that these are the sorts of items you'd put on a scale to measure relationship value along these lines. All right. We find that people's rates of change in these scales over a long arc of time can be reasonably well fit with a logarithmic model, which suggests that you experience lots and lots of change early on, and that as time increases, as time goes out tenfold, you experience 1 unit increments. You experience 1 unit declines as time increases tenfold. Okay, so we get these kind of curves for people, and we can fit them pretty well with initial status estimates, and then an estimate of simply, it's a control parameter showing how quickly logarithmic decay is happening in these curves. And then what we want to do is take those individual differences in rates of decay and predict them with other nice things, like whether you're a boy or a girl, how close or committed you are to the person who harmed you, how painful you experienced the transgression as being, how responsible you thought they were for the harm they caused you, how intentional you thought it was, whether they apologized, and then finally this measure of perceived relationship value. So what we find is, even after controlling for this suite of variables, which are kind of like these are sort of a set of usual suspects that we often find correlated with forgiveness. Even after controlling for these, this perceived relationship value variable, does unique predictive work in describing the rates at which people's feelings of sort of ill will decline for people who have harmed them.
So is that measured ex ante or ex post?
I'm sorry?
Is that measured ex ante or ex post?
Ex ante. We measure this before people even, this is as soon as we can get hold of them after the harm has happened
But
to
after
them.
the harm is done.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You gotta recruit them somehow. Mark. You can't say, we're gonna mess with your relationship. So you recruit people who've recently been harmed.
Or just recruit a lot of people who figure that some will be harmed.
All right. So, we did our own ethnographic work to look at the kinds of conciliatory gestures that humans do. And when I say ethnographic work, it was me and this postdoc that were working with me had coffee one day and wrote a list of 45 behaviors or so that we thought people did in order to try to make amends when they harmed somebody. And we came up with compensating people, apologizing, promising not to do things again, giving gifts, surrendering your power to harm in some way, like this fellow is doing in this ritual way on the cover of Blood Revenge by Chris Bohm. Do you guys know this book? This is a really interesting book in which he talks about his ethnographic work with tribal Montenegrins. These two groups of men are different kin groups, and they've been locked in this feud. And these feuds can play out over many generations. I'm sure you guys know all this stuff cold, and I'm just embarrassing myself. But it's really quite interesting because the feuds can play out for many, many years, in fact, generations. But at some point when these groups have lost enough men, they've lost enough, enough of their sort of, males in the families, they kind of find their backs are to a wall and they need to make peace. And so they have this ritual for making peace where a male from the kin group who fired the first shot, right? Not necessarily the group that started the conflict with the first insult or the first, argument, but the first group to kill somebody sort of takes on the role of sort of the apologizers or whatever you want to call them. This guy has walked from he's got a rifle on his shoulder, and he's left his group, crawled on all fours over to a representative from the other kin group. And the way Bohm describes it, often they're doing this in their underwear for added effect. But he's going to offer the rifle to this representative to say, here's the rifle that fired, that killed the first man. We don't want any more. We want this feud to be over. And this is so embarrassing for this representative of the other group that he lifts him up and they try to make peace and they have a big ritual and they eat and everybody becomes great friends again, I guess. But the point I want to make is that they have these rituals that seem to be a part of the trajectory of these blood feuds, and perhaps not unlike some of the things we do more prosaically in our daily lives. I mean, we don't wear our underwear and get on all fours, but we do engage in sharing of food, surrendering our power to harm, self-abasing displays, explicit requests for forgiveness, and so forth. So we wanted to understand a little bit about these behaviors in particular and the ways in which they might influence the forgiveness process. So we did some experiments where we brought subjects into the laboratory who had been who had been recently harmed, and we had them report on the extent to which their transgressors had provided several of these conciliatory gestures. And we had subjects rate their harm doers on a personality trait called agreeableness, which is a measure of it's a measure of your value as a relationship partner. It contains items about your modesty, your honesty, your kindness, your altruism, and so forth. And then we got more of these records, daily records of your feelings toward the people who harmed you. And what we ended up finding is that the more of these conciliatory gestures you reported that your transgressor was doing, the higher you rated them in agreeableness, And then as a result of its intermediate effect on perceived agreeableness, the more quickly you forgave them, right, the quicker those negative feelings toward the harmdoer declined over a 21-day period. Right? And so this mediational model looks good enough in these sort of quasi-longitudinal data. But we wanted to look at this experimentally to see if you get the same effect. I mean, do these apologies and promises of forbearance and offers of financial compensation, do they actually promote a return to constructive relationships in the laboratory? So here's a game that we had participants come in and play with a computer that who they thought was a real person. The computer starts off playing generous tit for tat. This is just a standard iterated prisoner's dilemma, okay? So you play this game for 10 rounds with a computer that's playing a generous tit for tat strategy, right? It's very tolerant, it's very friendly. And after 8 rounds or 10 rounds, the computer sends a message. You think it's a real person. It says, hey, let's keep cooperating. Look, we're doing so great, right? Our cooperation's hovering around 70%. Let's keep cooperating. And so our subjects actually do increase their cooperation a little bit. After that, for some reason, the computer inexplicably begins to defect. Defect. What an asshole. And we also see our subjects' rates of cooperation go down, as you'd expect. And here we have an intervention. We have an experimental manipulation where the computer either says something along the lines of, hey, I'm sorry for doing this. I'll cooperate for 5 rounds, and you can keep choosing defects so you can make your money back. And what we expect to see is a return to cooperation. All right? So what we got here is actually that conciliatory condition, but we also have an aggravating condition where the computer says something along the lines of, sorry, that's just how you play the game. I'm just trying to make as much money as I can. And we also have a control condition where the subjects, the computer says, wow, this takes more concentration than I thought it would. Our key dependent variable is the rate at which you return your rate of cooperation in the rounds following this intervention, this treatment where we either send a conciliatory message or an aggravating message or a control message along with an offer of compensation. Okay. For subjects who...
The behavior's the same.
The behavior's the same, right. No, sorry, no, it's not. It's not. For the compensation, for this conciliation condition, you're getting 5 rounds where the computer is choosing...
Oh, but not for the aggravating, okay.
That's right. That's right, exactly. Okay? Thank you. So if you've been in this conciliation condition, you've got an apologetic offender who's then going to allow you to earn back your winnings, right? Because it's going to be cooperating and it's inviting you to defect in order to get your winnings back. Yes, ma'am?
So then aggravating and control, what is the behavioral repertoire? Just
It's just straight from this silly aggravating message or this silly control message back into generous tit for tat. Right? Okay.
But it's stuck in a defecting loop, basically.
It's been defecting. It sends you this, this aggravating message, which really does aggravate people, or this control message, and then it just returns to playing generous tit for tat.
Generous tit for tat is not generous enough to get it back to cooperating levels at that point.
That's right. That's right. So what we find is that the rates of cooperation for people who receive this conciliatory message are very high, plus the actual compensation offer. They go back up to 86%, which is significantly different from our control and which is very significantly different from the aggravating condition. So,
Is there any cooperation at all under aggravation?
gains of trade. I mean, there are still gains of trade to be had because this person is cooperating, right? It's return to cooperation. And in fact, if you defect after...
How do I know?
Well, because it's defected. Because let's say, I mean, that's just how that generous tit for tat works, right? It starts out nice, and even if you defect once...
Oh, so it cooperates once?
And actually a second time. Even if you defect on the first round, it will cooperate on the second round.
So it says I'm going to be a jerk, and then it cooperates?
Yeah, exactly.
So how are you defining generous tit for tat? What's the rule?
It starts out nice, and then it, with 67% likelihood, will cooperate after you defect. Yes.
So it's exponential or geometric declining.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're getting this behavior change, right? And that's, I mean, this is, you're sort of saying, that's, why would you do an experiment on that? What we're really more interested in is the computational piece here, okay? What's changing perceptually for participants? I'm in the psychology department. I have to do a little psychology some of the time. And what it seems to be tracking are actual changes in your perception of this person's personality. So your ratings of their personality level agreeableness are much higher in the conciliation condition than they are in the control, which are quite a bit higher than they are in the aggravating condition. And then finally, we ask a measure at the end, two self-report questions. Game's over, you've been paid, thank you very much. Would you recommend this person you played with to somebody else who was coming into the lab to do this experiment? Sort of questions about your regard for them now that the game's over. And it's actually two questions that we use as sort of a measure of the sense to which you think you could be friends with this person outside of the game. In fact, that's the second question that gets combined here. Even though I don't know this person, I feel like we could be friends. This is significantly higher among people who have received the conciliatory message than it is for the people in the control or for people in the aggravating. And this path model fits the data really pretty nicely. If we dummy code our three conditions and use perceived agreeableness as a potential mediator, and we've got two dependent variables, perceived suitability as a friend, and our ratings of forgiveness, which are behavioral. That's just the amounts of cooperative moves you make in that final regime. We find that perceived agreeableness is doing significant amounts of mediational work. It is operating as the psychological variable in the black box. It's getting changed by our manipulations and thereby changing both forgiveness behavior and your evaluations of the sense to which you think this person would be a decent friend in the future. Okay? All right. Okay. Let me talk a little bit about some of our work to try to look at some of the endocrine supports for these effects. I mean, if forgiveness and revenge are affecting psychology and ultimately affecting behavior, we might be able to find a little purchase on the point of these behaviors if we can look a little bit at the neuroendocrine substrates for them. So I'll just tell you about a few studies we've been working on, and then I'll stop. This was a very small study we did with 34 women who had been harmed by somebody in their recent past. And we asked them to come into our lab. And this is actually common to a lot of the studies I'll tell you about in the next 13 minutes. They come in and give a speech into a videotape as if they were talking to the person who had harmed them. And these are real harms, okay? These are, I mean, they're not, it's not Kosovo or something like that, or, you know, Afghanistan, but they're things that you would not want to happen to your child away at college. Let's just put it that way. They are painful. People rate them as very unpleasant, and and for college students, they say, this is one of the most painful things that's happened to me. Okay? So you come in and talk about these harms into a videotape as if you're speaking to the person who harmed you, all right? About 30 days after the harms have happened. Earlier on, we've asked you to rate the agreeableness of that transgressor, right? Which is serving as kind of a very poor proxy for relationship value and also possibly for low exploitation risk. We want to take those apart eventually, and we will. But right now, all we want to see is, do agreeable seeming people elicit reduced cortisol reactivity when they've harmed you and you're sitting around thinking about them in the lab? And they do. We find that the more agreeable you rate this person, irrespective of the differences in how you've the severity of the harm, the type of relationship you had, how close you were with them, how much they apologized. I could go on and on in the controls we applied here. Agreeable people, when you then think about the person and you think about interacting with them, elicit smaller cortisol changes, reduced cortisol reactivity in the up to 25 minutes following the harm.
Sorry, just that I understand the protocol. So
Yep.
you're taking salivary samples presumably before they talk as if they're talking.
Yes, yes, and then we take them after the speech on 4 different occasions, and what we want to do is take deltas to represent changes in cortisol pre and post task.
What's the time constant?
This is immediately after the harm. This is about 12 minutes after the harm, pardon me, after the speech. This is 15 minutes, and this is 25 minutes. And we know that the peak for this cortisol change happens around 20 minutes after the offset of a stressor. So this looks right? I mean, in terms of getting the peak where we would expect to find it. Cortisol, social threat, maybe the best way to characterize the social, psychological quantum that it tracks most potently. So if we want to say something, we might say that agreeable seeming offenders seem to elicit less preparation to respond to social threats than do less agreeable harm doers. I hope I said that right. Let me talk a little bit about a study we've done on oxytocin. This was with 39 women who'd been harmed by someone in the previous 10 days. And it looks a lot like the cortisol study. We want to measure characteristics of their relationships with these transgressors, the transgressions themselves, and our perceived relationship value scale and a variety of things like that. We're going to do a similar speech transgression speech task, get 2 baseline samples. It says saliva, they're actually blood samples here, sorry about that. And then we want to measure blood 4 different times after that, 2, 5, 7, and 10 minutes after the speech. If you want to catch oxytocin changes, you got to be quick because they're evidently very, very pulsatile and very fast, and then they're over. Okay, so we want to look at whether oxytocin is changing differentially for people as a function of the extent to which they say they've forgiven these individuals who've harmed them. Okay, my intuition was that oxytocin would be higher among forgivers because it's the love hormone, right? Then we came across work by Shelley Taylor at the University of California, who had told a more interesting story about oxytocin, which was that oxytocin is acting like a neurotransmitter that wants to signal the need to make a change to a relationship that's not quite right in your social network. So she's actually found that oxytocin, these pulsatile changes seem to correlate with sort of not very nice things happening in your relationships, deficits in social relationships, reporting gaps, your pet doesn't love you. The more you report these sorts of things, the more your oxytocin seems to go up in stress situations. So we've got this transgression speech task, and what we find is, in fact, I think Shelley Taylor would like this, is that it's among the least forgiving people who are giving speeches toward about individuals who have harmed them, as if they were speaking to these people, where you see the highest oxytocin spikes, right? So the less forgiveness that we see, or the more unforgiveness as this scale works, the more oxytocin response we're seeing. On a second measure, where we have a measure of post-conflict anxiety, the extent to which you are worried about what the person might be planning next, right? You're worried that they might still present a threat to you. The more you endorse items like that also, the higher the oxytocin spike you're getting over this 10-minute arc post-speech. Okay, am I about right in thinking I should stop at quarter after? All right, good enough. Well, if the mind really is trying to get estimates of relationship value and exploitation risk, then it'd probably be nice to find ways to measure them distinctly. So we've done some work with Jenny Burnett at the University of Richmond to develop some self-report measures that attempt to get at them distinctly. And we get 2 factors for these items, for these sets of items that look like the kinds of clusters you'd expect if they are measuring different things. And what we want to do here is look at how these scales combine to affect the forgiveness process, all right? Do they combine linearly? Do they combine multiplicatively? How, in fact, does the mind want to use information about exploitation risk regarding a transgressor and combine that with information about relationship value? And you can tell a lot of stories about that. One story is, hey, just more is better. Lower exploitation risk plus high relationship value equals more likelihood of forgiving and moving on. But there are some pretty good reasons to think that a well-designed forgiveness system wouldn't really want to resume positive relationships with anybody at any level of exploitation risk if there's not value in the relationship, right? Because exploitation risk is always going to be greater than zero. So if there's no residual value to restoring a relationship with this person, well, sort of why bother? So we actually expected these cues to get combined non-additively, such that exploitation risk was only going to make a difference in the extent to which you'd say you forgave somebody if the relationship had high levels of relationship value, okay? So we ran a couple of different experiments and cross-sectional studies to look at this. In this first study, we asked people to think about someone who is an existing relationship partner, all right? And we asked them to think about whether they would forgive a variety of hypothetical transgressions from this person, okay? So, hey, if your partner did this, would you forgive it? If your partner did that, would you forgive it? And so forth. So to get a measure of their proneness to forgive this person in general, we get measures of their exploitation, the risk, the assessment of their partner's overall exploitation risk and their overall assessments of the relationship value that they attribute to this relationship with their partner. And we get that interaction that we kind of expected. At low value, at low relationship value, there's really no effective exploitation risk on the rate at which you're going to forgive somebody or the extent to which you're going to forgive somebody. But among those people who say the relationship has high value, those are the ones that are taking that information about exploitation risk into account. We get a very similar pattern, the same interaction, when we ask people to think about, these same people, think about a time your partner harmed you, all right, in the past, and tell us whether you forgave it, right? So here, this is sort of more real-life behavior. We get that same two-way interaction between exploitation risk and relationship value. Let me move on just very quickly to an experimental study with a different group of subjects where we ask people to report their responses to a standardized transgression. Imagine your partner did this, would you forgive it? After we manipulated relationship value. Think about all the things your partner does for you that are really valuable versus think about the ways in which you have to get by on your own in this relationship. And we manipulated exploitation risk at all with a similar manipulation. What we find when we manipulate these things experimentally is we get the same interaction. So a final look at this that I won't go into has to do with measuring individual differences in exploitation risk and relationship value. And again, we find that same interaction pattern. Okay, so it looks like from the point of view of judgments of whether you want to forgive someone or whether you have forgiven them, people really are taking these two kinds of information into account in a non-additive way. All right. Finally, I just want to look at what we know so far about the neuroendocrine correlates of exploitation risk itself and relationship value itself in the same kind of design, the reactivity design, where we have people come into our laboratory and participate in a treatment designed to elicit reactivity regarding the person who's harmed them. In this study, we gave them an interview. So tell us about your feelings about the person who harmed you. And then we had them give a speech. Then we have a recovery period, and then we have them do some surveys. And this whole thing allows us to go out for about, I don't know, you can add it up yourself, 90 minutes or something, where we can get saliva samples and then get hormones, 4 hormones out of the saliva samples to measure reactivity in these 4 hormones. We have a measure of relationship value, and we have a measure of exploitation risk, okay, with items sort of like these. All right. For both men and women who have come into the laboratory to give this speech, right, the higher their relationship value, the higher the extent to which they're saying, yeah, this is a relationship that's still meaningful and important to me, both for men and for women, the higher relationship value, the less cortisol is going to get pushed out into the periphery in the 45 minutes after this speech is over, all right? So again, cortisol looking like a measure of sort of social threat, social distress, seems to actually be being predicted by our measure of relationship value, both for men and women in this case. For men only, we find a very interesting association with exploitation risk, all right? The more you report that your transgressor is someone you can't trust, whom you're worried about harming you a second time, that you have to look over your shoulder to make sure they're not going to do it again, the more you endorse items like that about the person who harmed you, the higher your testosterone over the reactivity period. And it's a big correlation. Of course, it would have to be big to be significant with 27 people, but there you go. It's not happening for women at all. In fact, the correlation is like, well, it's 0.01. So for men, we find a very interesting effect that we're not seeing with the women here, which is that perceptions of exploitation risk seem to not be producing the strong cortisol effect we see for relationship value, but here we're seeing preparation for responding to social challenge, right? I mean, what testosterone wants to do in this acute case is mobilize energy to the periphery for responding to social challenges, potentially with aggression. So it's an effect we don't see with women and only with men. Okay. So we've got all these great reconciliation behaviors, you know, that are interesting and puzzling and, you know, part show, part reputational, probably part to, you know, reduce the effects of exploitation while at the same time recapturing benefits for the self in the long term. And there's a lot of research being done on them. In fact, some of the best research I think has been done on non-human primates instead of human ones. But my work has really been about trying to add some computational meat to the bone here and see what we can learn about what's actually happening in the heads of people or non-human primates maybe even, who are having to negotiate these really complicated fitness challenges in daily life. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate it.